Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to have my good friend here, Joe Sanok from Practice of the Practice, to talk about scaling up your private practice, marketing management, and money. Joe, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing awesome. How are you today, Perry?
I am doing so great. When I look at my calendar months in advance and I see that I have a time to get to talk with you in front of a big audience about marketing and growing a private practice, there are a few things that get me so pumped up than that. So thanks so much for being here today, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way. I feel like what you guys do with Brighter Vision and, even just how you go so much farther beyond just websites. It's always fun to have conversations about whether it's marketing, websites, growing the business. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, cool. We have so much fantastic knowledge and fantastic nuggets of information for everybody today. Just as a reminder, this is the final, finale of our fall into cash for 2019. If there are still a few giveaways, you can still enter, I believe, over at brightervision.com/cash 2019. Sam will put the link in the public chat here. If you're new to Brighter Vision, you haven't heard of us before, our whole mission is to make marketing simple for therapists. Our bread and butter are our websites, and our websites, basically, we build you a website that looks like you spent thousands of dollars, but it only costs you $2 a day. And now we have a lot of other software that helps you market your practice better, like Social Genie, which is a library of social media posts that are going to be organized and allow you to do all of your social media in about 15 minutes of work. As a special discount for our Fall into Cash campaign, we are offering $100 off any new website package with us. And that's about all the pitching I'm going to do, because I'm not here to pitch. Joe's not here to pitch. We're here to provide value to you. And the way that we provide the most value to you is by your questions. I strongly believe that your questions that you have help take a webinar from good to great or to fantastic. So if you have questions, please type them into the general chat. We'll do our best to answer them in a timely fashion. We do have a hard stop here in about 58 minutes. So let me, introduce Joe a little more. If you're not familiar with Practice of the Practice, Joe helps counselors create thriving practices that are the envy of other counselors. He has helped counselors to grow their businesses by 50 to 500%. Whew, man, let me pick my jaw up off the floor there. And is proud of all the private practice owners that are growing their income, influence, and impact on the world. Joe, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that we've got so many people here and excited to take their questions and to share just some new things that we've discovered in regards to marketing and private practice.
Yeah, so let's start off and talk about a website. The website is kind of the focal point behind all of your marketing efforts. A website is going to reflect you and your practice. It's going to drive in those ideal clients. And we're really here to talk about some specific strategies, though, that you can go from scaling your private practice. And Joe, you always ask me the website questions. I'd love to flip the table a little bit and talk with you about what do you feel are some key elements that a private practice that is going from, one or two clinicians to 5 to 10 over the next year really need to take into consideration for their website?
Yeah, let's start with just generally what every website needs to have. And then I think there's some specific things around a group practice. And just this morning, so this is fresh in my head, I was doing a website consult for one of our next level practice members. She had won a 30-minute consult with me. And we walked through her website, and overall, it was really good, but there was a number of things that needed to be clearer. So the very first thing is, if you have a tagline, and when you have your name, usually it's a logo in the upper left-hand corner, make sure that tagline connects with your ideal client. So this individual, she was helping women over the age of 50, but her tagline was around like just helping individuals. And so you want to make sure that whatever your ideal client is, that pain and that solution or that market is somehow tied into your tagline. You want it to be consistent and clear. When people get to a website, there's only two things that they ask themselves, because we're so busy and we end up on the wrong websites. So they're scanning quickly. First, am I even in the right place? Like, am I on a counseling website? And I want to be on a counseling website. So I'm looking for a counselor in Boulder, Colorado. and I'm on a website. Is this a counselor in Boulder, Colorado? So the sooner you can answer that question, the better. It's amazing how many people still don't even have counseling or therapy above the fold before they even have to scroll. It's like maybe your URL says counseling, but that's it. Like if someone can look at your website and it says there's hope for your family, that could be a funeral home. That could be some sort of case management for helping get your kid into college. That could be therapy. That could be all sorts of different things. So we want to be hyper clear that you are a therapist that helps a certain population. The second question people always ask themselves is, yes, I'm in the right place. Now, can this person help me? Do they understand my pain? Is there a transformation? So very quickly, we want to think through, what is the pain that you help solve, and what is the transformation and the results of therapy with you? All right, next we want to look at the menu. So that menu bar that's at the top, I so often see people have 7, 9, 12 different items up there. You really want to limit yourself to only about 5. The ones I recommend are something along like getting started or new ? Start here. If you're brand new, then this is where someone should go. Next, we want to have an about me or about us page. People want to know who you are. Don't bury that down under something else. They should be able to figure out who the therapist is. And on that page, put your picture. The amount of about pages that have a stock photo, I'm like, this isn't you. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, put the picture on your about page. On that about page, you want to start again with the ideal client. Don't start with, I've been in therapy for 24 years. Start with, I love working with people that are struggling when their kids get kicked out of school. You know, they're just tearing their hair out and sick of going to the principal's office, and they think their kid's going to have to transfer schools for the 50th time. I went into therapy specifically to help those families because I've seen outcomes like this. That then makes your ideal client say, oh my gosh, you are my therapist.
Yeah.
And so you want to have that about page be dynamic towards your ideal client. All right, so next we want to have a service page column. So that's going to be all the different types of services you have. You know, what's great about working with Brighter Vision is you guys have a lot of those pre-written. Still go through those. Make sure that the images that are selected match your ideal client. If you help teen boys and there's a bunch of middle-aged women pictures, that's probably not that great for your anger management page. So make sure that you at least comb through it, even if 90% of the work is done for you. Next, you're going to want a counseling blog in some way that you're going to often be blogging. I recommend that you don't have the date be on there because when you're talking about couples or anger management or whatever your specialty is, that's still going to be relevant in 2 years. But if people see that the last post you put up was 2 years ago, they're going to think that you're not up to date. So just remove that date. And then lastly, you want to have a schedule and intake, get started, work with us, some sort of clear call to action. And ideally, if you have some sort of color scheme that you have going on for your page, say it's a light blue and white are the main colors, you want to have that be the opposite color button so that it's maybe all of the text is white text on blue background and then have that one flipped where it has maybe a white button with blue text. So it's super, super clear. Also,
and you want that all the way to the right.
All the way to the right. You never want it anywhere but all the way to the right. And then your hero image, before you scroll down, you really want to make sure it either shows the outcome of what you do. So people already know that they have a bad marriage. People already know that they're pissed at their kids. Don't show a picture of them being pissed at their kids because that's not why they're there. They want hope. They want transformation. They want to know there's a better way. So show the outcome of therapy. Don't pick a cheesy stock image. Find one that actually represents the kind of families you work with or the kind of people you work with and does it in a somewhat artistic way while still showing that outcome. Or have just a picture of yourself, a high quality picture of yourself on that front page, especially if it's your own practice without a group practice, that can really be effective as well. Other than that, the rest kind of below that doesn't matter quite as much, but you want to make sure, especially the pictures that you pick out lower down, that it feels like the same photographer took them. So it could be that you have the same filter across them all, have a similar photographer, similar bokeh effect. Make sure that you do all those different things and you'll definitely see your conversions go up.
Man, so much great information, Joe. And you know, with Brighter Vision, our team often will go ahead and do all that legwork for you to find those images that are going to speak to that ideal client. One thing you mentioned that I want to dive into a little more is just that value of, you know, your bio photo as your hero image. If you are a solo practice, that there's really nothing better than you can do than have a high quality professional photograph of yourself with a little bit of words about you. Sam or Katie will put in the show notes here about Sierra Braun's website, Affinity Counseling Group. I think, you know, that website really just hits the nail on the head about how you want to have a hero image if you're using your bio photo. Looking right at the camera, smiling, that builds that know, like, and trust factor. And then, like Joe said, as you're transitioning to a group practice, that's when you might want to change the hero image to be more of that outcome focused image that's really going to resonate with your ideal client and get them to feel the way that they should be feeling after therapy with you.
Yeah. A couple quick tips on the photo. Yeah. When you have a photographer take your pictures, make sure they take some where you are all the way over to the edge of the frame or all the way over with some blank space. So if a photographer was taking a picture of me in front of my shiplap here, I'd want somewhere it's just head on. I'd want somewhere I'm kind of in the third. And I want somewhere I'm all the way on the edge so I leave room for that text. Mm-hmm. Also, think about the different things you do. If you do online counseling, make sure that photographer takes pictures of you in front of a computer from maybe one side of it looking at you.
Yeah, that's a great point.
If you do, in-person counseling, have it look like they're in a session taking a picture of you. And then a kind of social media hack that I learned from Julie Hanks is have them take some fun pictures of you. Like if you have a blank wall like this, go like, and then you can put text on it like webinar coming up, or, you can add anything to it and use that. You can hold a blank, chalkboard and put images over that in the future.
That's a great idea.
So then when you have those things, you can then use that on social media or have a designer use it. And it's these high quality photos that you use to promote other things in the future.
One thing you mentioned I want to dive back into is the use of a blog. And I think when you're scaling your practice up, a blog can be a super effective tool, and even more so than when it's just you. Because when it's just you, you're doing everything. And once you start transitioning to more of a group practice and trying to scale your practice up, your job changes dramatically, and we can certainly dive into that. But one thing that can be really effective with a blog is having your other clinicians write content for the blog. I've noticed this a lot in some of the Therapist Experience podcast episodes we've done of really successful group practices, where it's required that every clinician writes a blog post every month or every 2 months. Doesn't need to be much, but what that does is it builds content on your website. It helps your SEO, and it helps your clinicians better understand, how to market themselves and how to market your practice for you. And so, as you're scaling up, you might want to start thinking about, hey, how can people in my company, how can people in my practice contribute to marketing the practice, contribute to growing the practice. And, it builds that teamwork, that camaraderie amongst your clinicians, and really, makes them feel a part of something super special, which is important as well.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple phases of blogging that people want to do. So when you first launch your website, you probably want to have about 15 blog posts that can go out weekly that really capture your ideal client. And so it's sitting down and saying, I'm going to write 15 blog posts. So maybe you're going to do a series, 3 different series, each being made up of 5 different blog posts. So say you help people with depression. You'd have one kind of pillar post that's like an overview of depression or an authoritative guide to depression. So that might be gigantic. It might be 1,500 words. And then saying, well, what are all the different types of depression? Well, there's seasonal affective disorder. There's postpartum depression. There's just life transition depression. It's kind of a blip on the map. So talking through those, linking them together, and then having them go out regularly would be phase 1. Phase 2 would be creating other content that can be repurposed as a blog post. So let me give you an example. So I do a ton of Facebook Lives. I'll just come up with 3 or 5 steps around something. So let's take that same depression thing. So we're moving into some of the darker days of our year. And so if you're going to talk about seasonal affective disorder, you might put together the 5 things you can do during the fall that you can do to ward off depression, or at least improve depression. And so you could do
great blog post right there.
Great blog post. Well, so you do a 5-minute Facebook Live on that. And then this is what my team does for me. That's all I do. I do a 5-minute Facebook Live. I download it, and then I upload it to Dropbox. And that's the last thing I do. At that point, Sam then takes that video. She adds slides to it and text to it and uploads it to our YouTube channel. Then she pulls the transcript off of that, turns it into a blog post, embeds that video in the blog post, and then takes that and adds it to our email list. And so I now have multiple. She also sometimes will turn it into a Pinterest graphic. And so I've now spent 5 minutes and have all this extra content that's out there. And so having a team member that can do that for you, it doesn't take much to then say, okay, I'm going to do a Facebook Live for 5 minutes once a week, and I want to make sure that this content keeps going out.
So Joe, there's a lot of different ways we can take this webinar here. I feel like, we had some bullet points we wanted to talk about, but I think, it's so rare to be able to have your expertise here. And you have seen private practices grow, scale. You've done it yourself, and you're an expert in helping private practices go from 1 or 2 people to 10, 20 plus people. What are some of the tactical changes you need to make as a business owner to really be successful in scaling your private practice?
Yeah, I love this question. I just sold my counseling practice in June. And,
congrats again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And so I learned a lot through that process. And the more involved you are in your practice, the harder it is to sell and the harder it is to scale. And so you have to realize the things that only you are good at. And so maybe that's 10 clinical sessions a week instead of 30. Maybe that's not answering the phone. Probably that's not answering the phone. You may be good at it, but that doesn't mean that you should be doing it. It's probably scheduling you shouldn't be doing. And so starting to say, how do I pull myself out and make sure that my actual time is the very best use of my time? And so even if you just said, okay, I do 20 clinical hours a week, but I spend 10 hours building a practice, let's take that money and divide it by 30. So, okay, so this is how much you make per hour. Well, what if we cut that down to only 25 hours and we paid someone else 15 or 20 bucks an hour to do the things that you spend 5 hours doing? Yeah, that's money going out, but you could see one extra person and then end up moving ahead or just enjoy that 5 hours. So the biggest shift for people to move from 6 figures to multiple 6 figures is learning to aggressively take off hats. I say 6 figures to multiple 6 because you can get to 6 figures by hustling, by going crazy, by working 40 hours a week, but you are going to burn out. And so taking those hats off and having other people do some of the work is really important.
So how do you start recognizing which hat to take off first? I feel like the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of clinicians, based off of my experience chatting with them, is I am too full. Let me hire another clinician to take on more clients, and that's a good strategy to have, and it definitely works. But you're not necessarily taking a hat away.
Yeah.
You're just beefing up your staff, which is important to do to meet the demand. But you still have to be taking hats away from yourself. And so what are some of the better hats to be focusing on removing from your plate as you're trying to scale your private practice?
Yeah, so when I work with my consulting clients or in the mastermind groups that are kind of at that level, I start with what do you want your life to look like? So if right now you're seeing 40 clients a week, do you want that? Is that even what you want your life to be? Or do you want to see 15 a week? And so then we have to start with, where do we want to end up? And so from there, starting to think about the different types of columns. So what should I absolutely never be doing? I should not be writing legal contracts. I should have a lawyer write legal contracts. I should not be doing my own taxes. I should have an accountant do my taxes, because the first time I did that, instead of using TurboTax, he saved me 10 grand. Like, that was not worth the $300 TurboTax. So there's those kind of things that I should just never touch. There's those things that for some reason I'm touching them. I may even enjoy it, but I really shouldn't be doing. And so that could be phone calls, that could be calendars. I would start with really those logistical things even before you add clinicians to your practice. Because if you multiply the number of people coming into your practice and you haven't done that, you are going to be busier answering calls, doing scheduling, checking on the website, looking at SEO, doing all of that, and you shouldn't be doing that. So we want to probably, when you're busy, start bringing in some staff that are going to do those basic tasks that you shouldn't be doing. And I do think that then adding clinicians strategically around populations that you personally don't serve or that you're moving away from is really important. So if you're at the number of sessions that you want, then you just want to fill up other people to scale. Whereas if you're really busy, you're looking for people to hand off and to replace yourself. And so being able to do that effectively then allows you to move into work that's much more scalable than a practice. And that's where we're talking moving into e-courses, podcasting, email lists, products that support the work that you're doing in your clinical practice, but transcend maybe even your own community or state.
So, if we're kind of like looking at this in terms of stages, and thank you, Tina, Holly, Meredith, great questions. We're definitely going to get to all of these. If you have more questions, please type them in. We want to hear your questions so that we can help you more, because we are here for you. If we're kind of looking at a private practice in stages, stage one, I'm Perry, the therapist. I am doing everything. Ideally, I'm not doing my accounting and I'm not doing my legal. That's stuff that should be handed off right away. I'm not doing my website. I have brighter vision for that. But I'm listening to a lot of great podcasts like Practice of the Practice, and consuming as much content as I can. And it's just me. Maybe I'm using a practice management tool like Simple Practice or Therapy Notes. Then I'm starting to see that I'm getting too full. I'm starting to feel like I'm getting burnt out. I'm working so much. I barely have any time to dedicate to actually marketing my practice. All I'm doing is seeing clients. At that point, you're kind of transitioning into stage two. Is that right? Where you probably should be hiring either a part-time admin or office administrator and or more therapists. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that start phase, we're looking at 0 to 80,000. Somewhere between 60 and 80 is where you're going to start transitioning. I love when people, right from the get-go have someone that's answering their phones, because it's almost always cost positive, meaning that it's not an expense. Because if you miss a call during your session, that's not a guarantee that they're going to book with you. Whereas most people will just go through Psychology Today, and whoever answers first, they'll just schedule with them. Mm-hmm. And so it usually pays for itself. And so I see some questions about that. Move Forward Virtual Assistants. Allison Pigeon has an amazing virtual assistant company. I do get an affiliate link through her, so I just want to disclose that. She's one of our consultants, but she is doing it right. And so she has virtual assistants that people share between practices. So they have 4 or 5 different practices that they're answering the phones for, and each person kind of says, here's the script I want you to follow. So it is you figuring out what makes it sound like you. So you've got to figure out your systems. And then, you start to add the infrastructure and then adding those clinicians in. And then phase 3, I would say, is really pulling yourself out of the practice and saying, what is it about this clinical work that I love? And how do I share that message with people that I may never meet? So whether it's podcasting, e-courses, getting the word out through email courses, that's really where I see people start to bring in significantly more income, but then their influence and impact just goes through the roof too.
And so that kind of phase 3 is kind of, how do I make additional revenue without dedicating my time to it? I dedicate my time to it maybe once or maybe once a quarter, but then the revenue streams are just coming in and I have a team to support my practice that's going to, push forward on marketing those. When we're talking about virtual assistants, Meredith, we'll have a link to that, or Katie and Sam will get a link to that in here, and also we'll email you a link to the name of the virtual assistant company. When we're looking at how you hire an assistant, when do you think hiring a virtual assistant is the right decision? Thanks, Joe. And when do you feel like hiring an in-person administrator is the right decision? And how do you weigh the pros and cons of that?
The only time that I see that it's really worth it to have someone in person is if you're also keeping your billing in-house, because then they can be doing both things. Otherwise, you think about it, why does someone need to come check in with someone at a front desk? Like, you can just sit down and a therapist can come get them. Like, what are they actually doing that needs to be done? Maybe some psychologists that need some report writing or dictation, but a lot of that you can do, through virtual assistants also. You really have to justify that, office. That's a whole office that you're using for someone to sit there, versus having another clinician there doing. The stats on if it's 80% full is around 50 sessions a week per office that you should be able to do. And so you're losing money by not using that as a clinical office. So unless you're somehow saving money through billing, which I don't even know that that's always the case, there's very few times that it makes sense. Maybe if you also had more of like a holistic approach where maybe you had massage therapy or acupuncture, or maybe had like supplements or like a naturopath that worked there, that might make more sense if you're adding more of like a wellness medical model. But I would still say is this the very best use of that 200 square foot office?
And that's a great question. That, it's kind of like one of those decisions that I feel like only your private practice can answer, especially as you're going from that phase 1 into phase 2. I would imagine hiring a virtual assistant is probably the better route to go. You're saving money on overhead. I don't know the billing models of VAs, but I would imagine that it's much more reasonably priced than having somebody in there full time for you. And so you're going to end up ahead of the game there. So, as you're going into that phase 2 and working through that phase 2 where you have a few clinicians, you have a VA or two, what are some of the common roadblocks and struggles you've seen private practices in that stage encounter?
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, they don't know their own systems. It's all upstairs. So they're on a phone call with somebody that's an intake, maybe they're private pay. They know how they speak about private pay, but they've never documented that. And then they expect a virtual assistant to answer the phone and say, hello, mental wellness counseling. And they're supposed to somehow answer these really complex questions. Do you take out-of-network benefits? Or can you do this? Can you do this? And we're not going to give them any script. You really got to make sure that you understand how you do things. So even just starting, now, well before you have a virtual assistant, to just document what is it that I say when someone asks a question. If they say, like, do you have to prepay, or what's the no-show policy? How do you want someone to answer? You want someone to be able to answer as well as you do. So whenever I onboard someone, so we have a new director of details. So she's in my email, responding in my email, and then itemizing things for me to respond to. And she discloses when she's like responding for me. But for the first month, every single time that she didn't respond to an email that I thought she could have responded to, I BCC'd her on that email so that she could build out a library of responses so that eventually those kind of emails I never even see. And so I don't want to see emails that are a waste of my time that Jess could be spending time doing. Now, part of that is that I need to train her. Another part of it is I'm not going to just have feedback when I'm pissed off. I'm going to have regular feedback sessions that every week we meet. So we, in her first month or so, met twice a week for about half an hour each time. And it was, hey, what questions do you have? What do you feel like you couldn't answer? And let me give you some feedback on these things. Like the way you answered this, you did your best, but here's how I want you to do it in the future. Like, it's not out of ill intent that she screwed up. It's that I didn't train, or she didn't listen, or we didn't document. Let's not have emotions around that. Let's just say, hey, I'm going to teach you how to do this. Now, if the 50th time I'm giving feedback and I'm like, I have told you this 50 times, we're going to have a different conversation. But when you're training someone, having feedback be a regular part of how you talk is so important so that they can be learning as you go and not just get feedback when they screw up.
Yeah, because nobody wants to just be told that they screwed up.
Right. Well, and screwing up, but you want your team to be able to take risks and screw up. At least
right.
So we have a phrase that I stole from the community college I worked at. They never actually implemented it, but it's proceed until apprehended. So that means go forth, try a bunch of crazy stuff, see what sticks. And then if I say, whoa, you kind of crossed the line, I'll pull you back. I would rather have creativity lead our process and innovation and say, whoa, I never would have thought of that. Well done, Sam. That's awesome. Versus have them have to check in with me every time they have a new idea.
Love it, Joe. One thing, we're seeing a lot of questions come in that kind of relate to systems and processes. And I'd love to take a minute to dive into some of these questions. Before we do, I do want to just mention a book that I think is going to be really helpful to our audience here. It's a book that I recommended to my mother-in-law about, 5-6 years ago, maybe. It was before Brighter Vision really did its thing. And for those of you who aren't familiar, I interviewed my mother-in-law on episode 100 of The Therapist Experience. She owns a private practice in Jacksonville, Florida. Started it with just one other person. It's now, I think they have something like 15 clinicians, a very large IOP program, the largest private practice in Jacksonville, Florida. And the name of the book, and and when I recommended this book to her, they had no systems, they had no processes. Maybe they had some, you can't get to that point without some, but nothing that was able to scale properly for them. And it's called Why Making Money is Killing Your Business. It's by Chuck Blakeman. It's a phenomenal business book. One of the best business books I've ever read. And it's all about systems and processes and goal setting and working backwards from those goals and creating a plan to meet those goals. And those systems and processes are just so critical as you're trying to get from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. And it's something that you always need to be revisiting and always need to be working on. And, before you're able to hire people to manage these systems and processes, it's all on your shoulders. And, they read that book, my mother-in-law and her business partner. And, now my mother-in-law is a completely absentee owner. She shows up, I think once every other month and tries to do it at the beginning of a month and at the end of the month. So it's more like once every, 8 weeks or so. It's a great book to help you build out your systems and processes. So let's dive into some of these questions here, if you don't mind, Joe.
Yeah, let's do it.
Make sure we have enough time for them. And if we're asking questions or answering questions here and it brings up more questions, type them in. Let's talk about them. Let's help you guys out here. So let's see. The first question came from Tina Schneider. I was wondering how you found someone like Sam, and we're talking about Joe's Sam, not Brighter Vision Sam, who does the social media marketing, or is this part of a service with Brighter Vision? So I'll answer the second part of this question. So Brighter Vision has a new tool called Social Genie. And Tina, we can give you a free 14-day trial, and anybody else here. It's a new tool that we released after doing about 6 months of in-depth customer research. And basically what it allows you to do, there's a library of thousands of social media posts organized into a variety of pre-collected collections or campaigns. So, let's say a campaign on seasonal effect, on depression, or, depression in the wintertime, or postpartum depression. And you can basically click a few buttons, customize anything you want. But in essence, if you don't want to customize anything, you can spend about 15 minutes of work and have all of your social media scheduled and set up for 3 to 6 months ahead of time. It makes social media marketing really simple for therapists. It takes away the struggles of having to come up with content and actually, post the content. It just does it all for you. So Joe, I'll let you answer the first part of that question about how you found someone like Sam, Sam's been with you now for a while, at least 2 or 3 years, right?
3 years. Yeah, she's been full-time with us for 2 years. She left her job at a magazine in Cape Town to join us. She was doing it on the side for about a year and a half. The quick story with Sam, and I don't think that this is the story you guys have to follow, and that's why I'm going to do it quickly, is I found her on a website called Upwork. Upwork, you can do kind of short little projects. Freelancers will bid it out. Usually you don't get much of a relationship out of it, but then we took it off of Upwork and then kind of had it be a pay per hour type thing. The big thing that I discovered with Sam is finding the person that you can train into the roles you want, more than just finding some perfect unicorn that can do everything. You really want to avoid that, because if you have that perfect person that can do everything, you're going to lose them and you're going to be out of luck. And so finding someone that you can say, okay, this is my art person, and I'm going to start them at, I can guarantee 1 hour a week for you. So, 4 hours a month. Let's just do that. They may have other freelancing things. And so being able to build into them. So I put her through a course to learn how to do video editing. I've put her through courses on podcast show notes. I've put her through courses on being a YouTuber and YouTube for bosses. So I'm training into her, which helps me, but it also helps her career too. So it makes her keep leveling up her game, and she might leave. So I need to make sure that I keep coming up with products and services that justify her position. So for example, we haven't even really announced this, and we don't even have a landing page for it. We're starting done for you podcasting services. So show notes, show editing, doing your whole email course, doing your opt-in, everything that you need to start a podcast and grow an e-course. And so we're going to be launching that later on this year. But Kirsty, our newest person from Cape Town, we just have this whole Cape Town takeover of practice. We have 3 staff there now.
Oh my goodness.
I just found out as I was asking her questions this morning, she went to college for copywriting and learned GarageBand and podcast editing. And And so I didn't even know if she was like into this. And then she's like, oh yeah, like I went to school for that. And I'm like, it's amazing how when you ask your team some questions. And so, so when you talk to your team, you can then bring out in them. So we do an annual survey where I ask them, what are the big dreams outside of practice, the practice that you would like really dig? So in June, when Sam and I had our annual like kind of visioning conversation, she said, you know, I would just love to have my own podcast someday. And Allison and now Whitney Owens, who is our faith-based practice expert, she is also has joined the team. So each of them are launching their own podcast. So by mid 2020, we're going to have the Faith in Practice podcast. We're going to have the Start a Group Practice podcast. We're going to have the Branding Your Practice podcast. And Jeremy Zug is going to be doing the Scaling Your Practice podcast. And so what you do through virtual assistants and other people on your team is you can multiply what you're doing without having to work more. You just create the framework. And so in your practice, it may not be like how I did it, but you could do the exact same thing and taking your big message to the world in a way that's not going to just take up more of your time.
Love it. Hopefully, Tina, that was a helpful answer there. Upwork, I definitely second everything you said there. We've used Upwork for a long time. Actually found somebody, 8 years ago or so that I still use. He's over in India, and he does some basic virtual assistant admin tasks for me, data gathering tasks, and you can find some really great gems on there. You can also find just like hiring locally, sometimes you make the wrong hire, and it happens. Don't beat yourself up about it. Learn, become a better manager, a better leader, because even when you might mess up with hiring somebody, the likelihood is that's also on you. It could also be on how you trained the person or didn't train the person. My goodness, before Brighter Vision really became Brighter Vision, I could not retain anybody I hired. It was just churn and churn and churn. And now at Brighter Vision, we've never thankfully we've hired some really fantastic people, and promoted some really fantastic leaders, and we've never had an employee leave in the 4.5, 5 years or so we've been doing this that was not desired by both parties.
Well, I think that the big thing also is to remember, like, listen to your clients. And so like the reason that we're starting this done for you stuff is our highest end clients said, we don't have time to learn how to launch a podcast or to figure out a virtual assistant or how to figure out how to do show notes. Like, if you already are doing this, Joe, will you just do it for me? And so same sort of thing in your practice. If your clients are getting close to discharge, what is it that after discharge could be a service you offer them as just sort of like an oil change plan? Is it a monthly parenting workshop that they come to? Is it an e-course? Is it a membership community? There's so many things that you can do to say, you just invested a year of your life in therapy. Let's not have that just be a static thing, because things are going to come up, but you don't need to keep coming to therapy either. So here's what that natural next step is for you. And then the scaling side of it becomes very apparent. So even like when I look at Podcast Launch School, so like, let's just run some numbers on this. So we're charging $9.97 for that. And then our first affiliates, I think we're giving $400 per affiliate per referral. So $597. Now, if I sell 2 of those a day, so let's say I sell 2 a day times 365, that's $438,000 a year I make off an e-course. And so when you start to get beyond just that in the chair side of things, and you're able to start to have these multiple streams of income, it all perpetuates itself. Because as you level up as a podcaster, as you level up in an e-course or doing group therapy, then your individual therapy, you can raise your rates for if you aren't exclusively insurance-based. And so people will hear these things and be like, why should I spend time on all these different things? Because when one of them takes off, everything takes off. And that's where the real scaling happens. Because the people that, to me, I see get to like multiple 6 figures and 7 figures, they have to be doing some of those other things rather than sitting in the chair or even just having a group practice.
Absolutely. Joe, you mentioned your podcast launch school just now, but I don't think you've actually really dove into what that is. Can you just give a quick pitch to our audience about what your new podcast launch school is and what the deal is with that?
Yeah, so in Podcast Launch School, it's going to be a 5-module podcast that's different than kind of the average podcasting tutorial. A lot of the podcasting tutorials out there start with, buy this microphone, name your show. That actually doesn't come until module 4, because the very first module, we want you to figure out whether or not you even should do a podcast. And so even if you spend this money to go, you know what, that actually would be a waste of my time, we just saved you a whole bunch of time and money by buying that e-course. So we really help you decipher how you do a podcast. Because if your only goal for your podcast is to get local people into your counseling practice, you shouldn't try to shoot for national. You should be interviewing businesses locally. You should be, finding out about things that local people care about, versus if you're like, hey, I'm an EMDR therapist, I care about trauma, and I want to actually start a membership community for people to feel supported in addition to therapy, and it's going to be $29 a month, and I want to have 1,000 people in it. Okay, well, that's a much different goal. Launch a trauma podcast that can then help people and get people into that community. So we walk through that. We then walk through what are the different structures of podcasts, because there's the interview structure similar to what both Perry and I do, but there's short form, there's more long story based. There are so many different ways that you can do a podcast. Figuring all that out before you even name it or order a microphone is really important. And then we walk you through the calls to action that you're going to actually make money off of this podcast, because a lot of people do podcasts and they don't even make any money off of it. And they spend all this time creating a podcast. There's this thing called pod fading, where after about 10 episodes, people just kind of like fade out.
Because it's hard work.
It is. And so we want to help people kind of walk through all of that. Those people that aren't going to pay for done for you services, but are like, you know what, I want a podcast. I am more fired up about this even than I was 2 weeks ago, because I just went out to San Diego to the New Media Summit. And when I was there, I was one of the 40 icons of influence. They had 40 high-ranking podcasters come. And it was like the Voice style. People would come up on stage. They would have 2 minutes to pitch us to be on our show. Then we'd turn on this little light and then say, I want you on my show.
Cool.
So I heard over 200 pitches that were 1 to 2 minutes long over 2.5 days. So I was exhausted, but I noticed something. Out of those 200, only 3 people were licensed. All the rest were coaches. They were people that had had some experience and they said, hire me, I know how to save the world. But the audience that wasn't there were people that are licensed professionals. And those that were licensed professionals were invited to be on almost every single podcast that was there. So these podcasts, where the guys sitting next to me, they make $1.4 million a year just off their podcast. So they were like, these licensed people are insane. We got to get them on the show. And so more than ever, I feel like we need to have more people that are licensed and highly educated that have done the work and then connect with the general public. One of the stats I looked at was the difference between having a blog and having a podcast, that the podcast actually gave some episode in the last 90 days. So the difference between a person that just blogs and a person that has an active podcast is the same difference statistically as a 6-foot-tall person and Mount Everest. And so it's like, if I'm going to spend an hour of my time working on something, is it going to be just on a blog post? Or should it be on a podcast that then my team repurposes into a blog post, into a YouTube channel, and into all these other things? To me, it's evident that it's still the early days of podcasting. Every month, there's only about 160,000 podcasts that post an active episode sometime in the last 90 days. So that's such a small group compared to the, I think it's 6 million YouTube channels and billions of blogs that are out there. You absolutely can stand out in your market, and it's still the early days of podcasting.
I would agree entirely. And Joe, our audience can find out more at practicethepractice.com/podcast guide, correct?
Yeah. So we right there have our, it's called Smart Strategies to Start a Podcast. So we have 27 tips, tricks, and strategies that are going to walk you through your first phases of starting a podcast. If you want to be on the interest list, you can join there, or you can read more about Podcast Launch School at podcastlaunchschool.com.
Awesome. And we'll have links to that in this week's show notes. Let's dive back into these questions here. Holly, how long from when I make the changes on my site to improve SEO does it start to show results? Generally speaking, you're going to see results in, depending on what you're doing, in about 2 weeks or so. One thing that I think is really important, Holly, and a mistake that a lot of therapists make when it comes to SEO and the quote unquote results is how closely people track these things. certainly, you want to see that your site is going up in the rankings. You want to see that you're getting more traffic in the door to your website. But the end all be all, you don't want to change a word or two, wait 2 weeks and be like, oh, I'm not seeing change. Let me change another word or two. The best thing that you really can be doing for your SEO is one, have a company that's going to do it for you. So whether you go out and you spend a few $100s a month to have an SEO company do it, or you're going to go spend $60 a month with Brighter Vision, get your website and your SEO all in one, have someone else do it for you. Have someone you can work with and lean on and consult with. And then the other best thing you can be doing is just writing and producing more content. Tweaking a few words is not going to move the needle as dramatically as spending the time to create more content, because the more content you're able to produce, the better the likelihood that you're actually going to rank. I forget what the phrase was at your community college, but I think it applies to this as well. What was that phrase again? It was a great one.
Proceed until apprehended.
Yeah. So, proceed with more content until you can't anymore, until you're exhausted with it, and take a little break. That's where you're going to see the best ROI from, improving your SEO overall.
100%. I would add two things to that. I would also make sure you're looking at your analytics. Look at what your top pages are. Of course, your homepage, your about page, your contact us will probably be the top 3. But what are 4, 5, 6, and 7? Those are pages people are resonating with organically. When I first started the practice, after a year, I went to my analytics page and hadn't looked at it in a while. And I realized that this / naming page was popping up. And I was like, what is that? And I realized that I wrote a blog post that I had just wrote. I hadn't even thought it through. And it was how to name a private practice. And it was ranking #1 for when you searched how to name a private practice. And so I don't remember who said it, but they said, when you find a unicorn, make many unicorns. And so after that, I wrote a follow-up blog post on how to name a private practice, how to name a group practice. I did a podcast on how to name a practice. So I had to download how to name a practice. And then I had, a short e-course on it. And so you find what's working and then do more of it. The second thing I would advise is trend jack. So trend jacking is when there's something that's already trending. So, you could go on Twitter and see what the top hashtags are right now. Whenever a celebrity does something crazy, that's usually trending. What's your psychological point of view on that thing that's trending? Now, everything trending right now, don't go write blog posts on, but pick a couple. If there's something that's trending, you say, yeah, I have some psychological opinions on that. Use some of those keywords. You may not rank #1 for that, but if someone searches it, you may rank on that first page for that as a psychological approach. And you're better positioned then to reach out to local radio or TV to get that free media by saying, hey, I just wrote about this trending topic from a psychological standpoint.
Not only would you get your better position to get people to that you can outreach to and get links back, but people can find you more often. If there's a trending topic, more and more news organizations are going to want to write about it. And if they find your article, they're going to reference it, give you a link back to your website. That's going to help your SEO in a dramatic way as well. Really, really excellent advice there, Joe. Meredith asks, how do I find skilled people to take these things off my plate? I think we already talked about that. Catherine, I hear you on hiring an accountant, but every time I do, I end up owing more than when I use TurboTax. Can you recommend a legit accountant in Texas? I certainly cannot, but I can speak to hiring a good accountant. There are some that are really good. There are some that are really bad. And there are a lot that are just in the middle. Just like with anything, with any kind of profession. I think
there's a couple things in that depending on when you had your accountant, it could have been a fluke, especially with the new tax code. Last year, they were all like, we don't know what to do. We'll see how it shakes out. I fired my accountant because of his lack of knowledge on it, because I owed $30,000 more than he had predicted. So that was a bit of a shock. So now I have a new accountant. I think there's a couple of things. Having a good bookkeeper, that's not going to be state specific. So Greg Higdon at Grow the Books, I'm not an affiliate with him, but he's my bookkeeper. He's awesome. He keeps track of what's going on in the accounts to optimize things for when it's tax time. Things that you want your accountant to do is at least once or twice a year to sit down and look at what you're paying in your quarterlies and make sure that you're putting enough in or not putting too much in. And so ideally, an accountant is going to help you optimize your tax situation. The best thing I can recommend is to just go on, Facebook or something like that and say, asking for a recommendation for a good small business accountant here in Texas.
The other thing to kind of jump on that topic is right now, if you're still, Catherine, the same business type entity you were before the tax law, you should really sit down with any accountant you have right now or the one you hire to discuss whether changing your entity type makes sense. There are very few private practices that are C corps, but there are a lot that are LLCs, and really, 9 times out of 10 right now, you should be an S corp. The tax law has just written an absurd amount of benefits to S corp business owners. So if you're not an S corp, if you're a sole prop or an LLC or something, get on the ball to change that right now, because you're going to save a lot of money on taxes.
And just a quick qualifier, neither Perry or I are accountants or attorneys, and we are speaking from our own professional experience, but not advisors to you.
Cool. Thanks for emphasizing that, Joe. Yes, that is an important thing to talk about. Do most VAs also do the social media piece, or is that a separate VA?
Yeah, I kind of briefly touched on that. You really want to make sure that you have things segmented out so that it's not one person doing everything. I have my VAs put the information into a program called Meet Edgar. Meet Edgar has a library of social media, very similar to kind of what Brighter Vision's doing, and then it cycles through that social media. So for example, if I'm a podcast guest for someone, we have a schedule for when we promote that I was a guest on someone's podcast. So they just put in, hey, I was just a guest on just today, I was on the Awakened podcast. So when that goes live, we'll have that social media image. So someone will email me. We have a system. Someone will email me. Jess sees that email. I never see it. She forwards it to the person in charge of social media, which is New Sam. We have 2 Sams. To New Sam. New Sam then puts that into Meet Edgar, and then it goes out into that. Jess also replies to that person, thanks, we'll put that into our social media queue. So I never see any of it, but we have a system to make sure that happens.
Yeah, and Meet Edgar is a really solid tool. We used to use Meet Edgar here at Brighter Vision. We now use Social Genie. One thing that we've done with Social Genie that's really helpful for clinicians is that you can just upload your logo into Social Genie, and Social Genie will take your logo and automatically embed it on top of every image that goes out. So you get your branding there front and center as well, without needing somebody else with that expertise in Photoshop to add your logo to every single image as well.
That's super sweet.
Rinda, so glad you're using Social Genie. Thank you. Let's see here. Lots of notes.
I don't remember who said it, but they had questions about the done for you services. Just email me, joe@practiceofthepractice.com, or you can go to practiceofthepractice.com/apply and just click that you're interested in that. Jess will jump on a quick phone call and get more details, and then you and I will talk for half an hour. We're never about selling people into things that aren't going to give a massive ROI. So we just try to make sure that you're a good fit for whatever it is you're thinking about doing.
Awesome. And that's why we love working with you, Joe.
We have enough people applying for things that if I put someone into something that's not good for them, it's like, that's not good for them, but it's not good for me to have people saying, yeah, Joe totally sucks.
Exactly. So from Tina asking Joe, what if patients are more ongoing as they might not discharge when I work with people that have neurodevelopmental disorders? Is there a way to ethically keep them as clients while offering services when they are on maintenance?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't know the exact details of each client, so I'll speak generally to that question. But I would say, what are the things that if you had 10 of those types of clients that you would repeat in all 10 of those sessions? And could that be an e-course that speeds things up outside of the sessions? So, if you know that there's certain exercises they need to do at home, if there's certain mindset things, like I know with neurodevelopment, like even just brushing your teeth with the opposite hand helps build different neural pathways, or driving a road in a different way than you've typically driven home. So not knowing your therapeutic approach. But what are those things that you would repeat over and over, the exercises you would give, the teachings that you would want them to know? Another way to think of it is, if someone came to a first session and they were highly prepared for therapy, like more prepared than anyone's ever been, they knew what they needed to know, they were bought into your system, they understood things, and they were already maybe reading books or doing exercises that helped them be set up to get the most out of therapy, That should be in an e-course, through an email course, or even just like something in Teachable. And you could sell that for $197 and say, you know what, for you to get the most out of therapy, yeah, I charge $200 per session, but we're actually going to have fewer sessions and not have to meet as often if you prep by going through this e-course before you come to your first session. Or you could do it to your current clients to say, hey, why don't we space out to every other week? I have an e-course now that you can buy it for this period or this amount of money, and it's going to help us be able to have even faster progress.
Great advice there, Joe. This question is from Chantel. Starting out, do you recommend sharing office space or getting your own office space?
Yeah, so when you're first starting out, to keep your cost and your risk down, I would say subleasing from someone else is usually the best way to build growth. The way that I recommend doing that is to say that you're giving a percentage of what you bring into them as payment, and then have the upper level of that percentage be higher than the market value. So say they could rent out this for 2 days a week for $500 a month. Maybe you say, I'll give you 20% of what I bring in, up to $600 per month. So then some months you may pay $200 or $250, and it can grow with you, rather than, I just get this every Friday and I'm paying, $200 a month for this, but I only have one client. And so it's not even paying for itself. That's the best that you could have. Second best would be that you have just one set day that you pay for a day or a half day, but ideally you want it to grow with you. And then, when you leave that situation, you want to make a big jump. And so, for example, we had a single office that we had that kind of deal from a subleaser, and that psychologist only used it like once a week. And so I pretty much had free reign of it, but it was still percentage based. And I had 3 other clinicians working out of that office under me as part of my group practice before I jumped to a 4-office suite with a view of the water. And so I optimized the heck out of that till we were bursting at the seams. And that's what I really recommend that you do, is optimize it like crazy.
Great advice there, Joe. Meredith just gave a link to an accounting company in Texas that she likes so far. So to the individual who had an accounting question, definitely take a look at that. It looks like it's masterplantaxes.com. Let me see here. Some notes. And that wraps up our questions right on time here. About 3 minutes left. Man, that was fantastic. Thank you, Joe. And thank you to everybody here who was either listening or asking questions or will be watching this later. We love doing webinars. We love helping people, providing value. And I hope you all got a ton of value out of this webinar on scaling up your private practice. We had bullet points. I think maybe we hit 1 or 2 of those. And then it was just a great conversation here that I think really provide a lot of value to our audience. So Joe, thanks for being here. Yeah, this was awesome. I loved it. Awesome. Well, that about does it for today. If you still want to enter Fall into Cash, you can do so at brightervision.com/cash 2019. Great. Thank you for all the wonderful, helpful comments. We love seeing that. Really helps, brighten up our day here. So thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everybody.